You are lying face down in snow that has been falling since before dawn, and the cold has long since stopped registering as discomfort because your body has more urgent concerns. Every exhale rises as a white plume that catches the flat winter light, and you know that plume is a signal, a beacon, a confession of life in a landscape that punishes the living. 30 meters ahead, a reindeer paws through the crust to reach lichen beneath, and the sound of its scraping hooves is the only thing breaking the silence of this frozen world. Your bow arm is numb, your arrow is knocked, and you have been waiting in this position for nearly an hour. One wrong twitch, one visible breath at the wrong moment, and the animal will bolt, taking with it the calories your family needs to survive the next week. So how did you get this close without modern camouflage fabrics, without synthetic whites, without anything designed in a laboratory? Here is what most people get wrong. The hunters who thrived in these environments for thousands of years did not rely primarily on white clothing to disappear. Their concealment was built on something far more sophisticated, a system of behavior, timing, and controlled contrast that modern observers are only beginning to fully appreciate. The human eye, and more critically the eye of prey animals, evolved to detect movement before color. This is not speculation, it is the foundation of how visual predation and evasion have worked for hundreds of millions of years. Ancient hunters understood this principle intuitively, even if they could not articulate it in scientific terms. They knew that a perfectly white garment could betray you instantly if you moved at the wrong moment, while a mottled gray-brown fur could render you invisible if you remained still when an animal's gaze swept your position. Snow concealment was never simply about matching the background. It was about breaking the human silhouette, managing contrast at the body's edges, and controlling movement timing with almost painful discipline. The outline of a standing human is one of the most recognizable shapes to prey animals that evolved to fear predators. So hunters crouched, crawled, hunched behind natural features, and pressed their bodies into irregular positions that fragmented that telltale outline. They used terrain as their primary camouflage, positioning themselves against snowdrifts, rock outcrops, wind-carved ridges, and the shadows of spruce or birch trees, where the contrast between light and dark was already complex enough to absorb an additional shape. But here is what ruins even the best positioning. Your own body constantly betrays you in ways that have nothing to do with clothing color. Breath vapor is perhaps the most dangerous of these betrayal signals. In temperatures below freezing, every exhale produces a visible plume that rises and catches light, and prey animals are extraordinarily sensitive to movement at head height where predator eyes typically appear. Experienced hunters learn to exhale slowly downward, into fur collars, through wrapped face coverings, or by timing breaths to moments when the animal's attention was elsewhere when it bent to feed, when wind gusted strongly enough to disperse vapor instantly. Beyond breath, the human face is a liability. Eyes reflect light, especially in the flat, diffuse illumination of an overcast snow day. Wet skin shines. The dark openings of mouth and nostrils create spots of intense contrast against pale backgrounds. Preserved hunting garments from northern Siberia and Scandinavia often include hoods, masks, or high collars that serve not only to protect against cold, but to eliminate these contrast points. The simple act of keeping your mouth closed was a form of concealment. And then there is sound, perhaps the most unforgiving betrayal signal. Snow exposed to cycles of melting and refreezing develops a crust that squeaks and crunches underfoot, and that sound can travel hundreds of meters in the still air of a cold morning. When we imagine ancient hunters in snow, we often picture them in pure white furs, but this mental image is largely a modern invention. True white animals are rare in nature, and their pelts were valuable precisely because they were uncommon. Most hunters wore what was available: the gray-brown of reindeer hide, the cream and tan of undyed wool or felt, the mottled patterns of various mammals whose coats shift seasonally but rarely achieve pure white. Paradoxically, these imperfect matches were often more effective than pure white would have been. Snow itself is rarely uniform. It is shadowed by terrain, dirtied by wind-blown debris, broken by exposed vegetation, and constantly shifting in tone based on light angle and time of day. A pure white garment could stand out against these variations as much as a dark one. The key was achieving visual texture that blended with the environment's overall complexity rather than matching a single imaginary color. Some cultures turned fur outward to create surfaces that scattered light like snow crystals, while others turned it inward for warmth and relied on undyed wool, linen, or bark fiber outer layers. In regions where felted materials were available, hunters valued them for muffling sound as well as providing insulation. Thick felt boots moved more quietly across crusted snow than stiff leather soles. The landscape itself was the primary camouflage system, and skilled hunters read terrain the way a navigator reads water. Wind-carved drifts created natural blinds that a hunter could approach from the lee side, staying below the crest until the stalk's final moment. Shadows cast by conifers at low sun angles created zones of complex contrast where the human form could be absorbed into visual noise. Frozen lakeshores often developed a haze of ice crystals suspended near the surface, and hunters used this natural obscuration to approach prey traveling along ice edges. Reeds and dead grasses protruding through shallow snow broke up sightlines for patient stalkers willing to move only centimeters at a time. Rocky outcrops that retained heat created irregular surfaces that camouflaged movement more effectively than smooth powder. But here is the critical insight separating effective concealment from mere hiding. You could not simply find cover and wait. You had to anticipate where the animal would move, understand its patterns, and position yourself along its probable path. This environmental awareness extended to understanding how prey perceived surroundings differently than humans. A reindeer's eyes are positioned for wide-angle movement detection but less effective at resolving fine detail straight ahead. A hunter who understood this could position their approach in the animal's forward blind spot, moving only when the head was turned or lowered. Movement discipline was learned through failure, and failure in subsistence hunting meant hunger. The principle was simple, but execution was agonizing. Move only when the animal cannot detect your movement. This meant watching prey with sustained attention that modern humans rarely experience. When a grazing animal lowered its head to feed, you had perhaps 2 to 4 seconds to advance before it raised its head to scan for threats. You learned the rhythm of that cycle for different species, different conditions. You learned that wind gusts masked sound and that footfalls should coincide with their peaks. You learned that the ache in muscles from holding a cramped position was preferable to the ache of hunger following a failed stalk. The stalk pause became instinctive, a complete freezing of motion whenever the animal showed alertness, holding that freeze for as long as necessary, often for periods that would seem absurd to anyone who has not experienced such stakes. Patience was not virtue in this context, it was survival mechanism. Archaeological evidence suggests some hunts lasted hours or extended across multiple days when tracking wounded prey. The caloric expenditure of a failed hunt was not just disappointment, it was a net loss that could compound into dangerous deficit if repeated. Every movement had to be justified by its probability of contributing to success. Now here is something that sounds completely backwards. Sometimes the most effective way to become invisible was to first make yourself visible deliberately. Hunters would occasionally expose themselves at a distance, allowing an animal to see them clearly, then drop behind cover and begin a patient circling approach. The animal, having registered the threat and tracked it to a last known position, would focus attention on that location, while the hunter moved through dead ground to a completely different angle. This was not accidental, it was tactical misdirection. Some hunters created false trails, walking openly along one route, then backtracking carefully in their own footprints before moving off in a different direction. The prey, crossing this trail, would follow the apparent path away from the hunter's actual position. Footprints in snow were not just evidence of passage, they were tools of deception. Some approaches were made along frozen water edges, specifically because the boundary between ice and snow provided visual confusion, and because prints on ice could be quickly obscured by wind-blown crystals. The principle underlying these tactics was consistent. Animals are not passive targets, but active observers with their own expectations and biases, and skilled hunters exploited those expectations rather than simply trying to avoid detection entirely. Reading tracks was as important as moving silently. Fresh tracks told you prey was near, but they also revealed direction, speed, alertness, and timing. A track with sharp edges and visible compressed crystals was minutes old, A track with rounded edges, blown debris, and thin ice glaze was hours old. Hunters read these details instinctively because approaching from behind meant higher success probability, while blundering into an animal's forward field of view usually meant failure. Approach angles also had to account for terrain. Moving along ridgetops silhouetted you against sky, a fatal error announcing your presence to every animal below. Moving through draw bottoms kept you hidden but trapped if prey moved toward you. The best paths were along terrain folds, subtle undulations that kept moving hunters below sightlines without limiting movement options. Rock art motifs, depicting hunting scenes, sometimes show hunters positioned in ways suggesting awareness of these principles, approaching from downhill using natural features as cover, or stationed along probable escape routes. These terrain reading skills were not recorded in manuals, but passed down through practice, observation, and shared stories of hunts that succeeded or failed. Scent control was as critical as visual concealment, perhaps more so when hunting animals with highly developed olfactory systems. Staying downwind was the fundamental rule, but wind in mountainous or complex terrain does not behave simply. Cold air sinks, creating inversions that carry scent downhill even when surface winds seem favorable. Early morning drainage flows move cold air from high ground to low, and a hunter positioned uphill in pre-dawn darkness might find their scent pouring toward prey as day began. Afternoon thermals as sun-warmed slopes could reverse this pattern. Experienced hunters learned to read not just the wind they felt, but patterns they could predict based on time, terrain, and temperature. Some ethnographic accounts describe hunters masking scent with snow, animal materials, or crushed vegetation, though effectiveness remains difficult to verify experimentally. What is clear is that scent awareness was widespread across circumpolar, boreal, alpine, and steppe winter hunting traditions, treated with the same seriousness as visual and acoustic concealment. In open tundra, where complex terrain was unavailable, wind direction could be the single most important factor determining whether an approach was even attempted. Return now to that frozen morning where we began, with you lying face down in snow, arrow nocked, breath controlled, every muscle trembling with the effort of stillness. You are not wearing anything designed in a laboratory. Your furs are practical brown-gray, weathered from seasons of use. Your face is covered by a hood pulled low, eyes barely visible through a slit that minimizes shine and contrast. You have been here for an hour because you read terrain correctly, predicted the animal's path, and positioned yourself in a ground fold that kept you below its sightline during approach. You timed every movement to its feeding rhythm, covered ground during wind gusts, and froze completely during every head raise. Your breath has been directed downward into your collar, dissipating before it could rise and betray you. You are invisible not because of what you wear, but because of what you are doing, because of a system of perception management that turns the landscape into concealment, treats the animal's expectations as tools, and understands camouflage as a dynamic relationship between observer and observed, rather than a static costume. The reindeer steps closer, head lowered, unaware. This is the payoff for all that patience, all that knowledge, all that physical suffering. A moment of opportunity earned through mastery of principles predating written history. For thousands of years, across every snowy region where humans pursued prey, this is how hunters stayed hidden, not through technology alone, but through profound understanding of how living things perceive their world and how that perception could be shaped by those patient and skilled enough to try,